Welcome to LifeWorks Today. This podcast is provided so that together we can create a world in which all people love their lives. Our current human systems aren't working. The way of superior versus inferior, or management versus employee, or adult versus child. We need a powerful, positive, and sustainable transformation. This podcast is for you who seek to be happy, fulfilled, and peaceful so that your abundant life works today.
Welcome, everybody, to the podcast, Lifeworks Today. We're really excited to be able to still bring you podcasting, although I want to let you know that my guest and I are doing this podcast virtually because of the coronavirus scare right now. And so you may hear some children or pets or something in the background, or that the quality of the sound will go in and out a little bit, but hopefully you'll get the general spirit of this conversation and the value that we're bringing to you for it. So I want to go ahead and just start out with a couple of things that I'm doing every time. And one is to let you know what the topic is today and give you something to kind of think of as you're going through this with us, which are some quotes that I bring to the table on the topic. So this episode is called The Power of Mentoring. And I'm going to have a guest on here in a few minutes that not only has he learned about how to do mentoring, he does it so consistently that he's even doing it from his virtual positioning right now with his company and his team members. So that was really exciting to hear. But the quote that I want to open this session with, it's by Steven Spielberg. And it's the delicate balance of mentoring someone is not creating them in your own image, but giving them the opportunity to create themselves. And that is so consistent with what we do within our mentoring and the purpose and the spirit of the mentoring we have. It's not to create people, it's to help them discover who they really are. And that's kind of been a driving force for why I do this work, is I really believe that people do have that core need to feel seen and heard, and even sometimes to see and hear themselves. What am I feeling? What do I want? You've heard me talk a little bit about that. So before I really jump all the way into this episode on mentoring, I want to kind of just tie this back to some of the themes that I've covered in the past episodes. So in the first 4 podcasts, there's a consistent theme of developing people, even if they're little bitty people in your home or they're big people in your workplace, and doing the development of people rather than the controlling of them. And I referred to this as transfer of responsibility to people so that they pick up what Adler called task ownership. And that means simply people owning things like managing their own relationships, managing their own productivity, their own engagement level, their own mastery of emotional intelligence tools, and even being able to formulate and move forward a plan of progress that we call a blueprint plan. So in this episode, I'm going to cover the purposes, the processes, and the pitfalls of mentoring sessions as they're recommended by my company, Lifeworks Systems, because other people might look at mentoring completely differently. So coaching, counseling, and advising are not what we do in our mentoring. Those involve information being shared by a more knowledgeable person to a less knowledgeable person. The questions that I want to answer in this podcast are, what is mentoring, and is it really necessary? And if it is, why? And what's the point? What's the purpose of it? And what is the healthiest type of mentoring, and how often should it happen? The focus of this episode is that it's really important for every human being to receive consistent one-on-one support, combined with making sure that you take that, even if it's the one time that you take with them, to show them appreciation and to even ask them questions that allow them to feel that what they have to say matters and that they are able to expand and grow through their own self-awareness. So people are empowered by direct attention, getting recognition for their gifts and contributions, and that invitation to live a purposeful life, because our work is also based in purpose and values. So with all of that being said, I want to go ahead and I want to introduce you to my very esteemed guest, Mike Minkler. So I want to just tell you a little bit about Mike. Mike is the president and one of the owners of CMIT Solutions. CMIT is an IT company that works with small business owners to help them understand how they use technology, His company delivers peace of mind to business owners through proactive, predictable technology support. They're a provider of flat fee managed services to small and medium-sized businesses. They advise clients on security concerns related to computers and technology. They provide solutions that enable the evolving mobile workforce. They provide backup and disaster recovery solutions to protect valuable assets. And then in addition, they have a large variety of other services, including cloud computing. I want to tell you a little bit more about my experience with Mike. He is one of the most powerful and innovative leaders. He's always eager to learn and to develop new skills himself and to empower his staff in doing the same. I have always enjoyed working with Mike. What Mike does is he functions from purpose and values, and he's willing to invest time and money into maintaining, measuring, and improving a really healthy workplace culture and strong interpersonal and trustworthy relationships with his employees and his coworkers, his co-owners. So I am so proud and pleased to introduce you to Mike Meekler. And Mike, why don't you go ahead and say anything else you want to say about you and how we met and anything about that?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Judy. And thank you for inviting me on today. I'm really excited to share some of our experiences in mentoring and the overall LifeWorks process that we've been through and have been going through. What I always like to say is it's very much a marathon, not a sprint. And it's something that we've incorporated over the last 3 to 4 years, mentoring and the overall LifeWorks system into our business. And we initially met because I was looking for a human system. I didn't know at the time that's what I was looking for, but after watching you present and talk about engagement of your employees in the workforce, it really hit home for me. And that's when we started working together.
You have always been one of the easiest customers. You have no idea how hard it can be in some client sites. So I just have to reiterate that to you. You always made it easy and you went fearlessly. I hope this doesn't put you on the spot, Mike, but what is the purpose of CMIT? Can you tell me that so that the listeners can hear how you operate by that purpose?
Yeah. It's to maximize potential, positive experiences, and personal growth. That is our purpose. It's really been life-changing from a number of different perspectives. I think biggest surprises, honestly, having gone through the process, and not only for me personally have I been affected that way, but hearing from my employees and how it's changed their lives as well has really been a very, very nice surprise overall. And when we went to lunch and when we did that presentation together, I think you really felt that, right? From 3 of my employees participated on a panel, and one in particular had left us to take a new position at another company that was, viewed as a promotion. And he realized pretty quickly that, hey, the culture here is not at all like what I left, and that is really important to me. So he ended up actually coming back to us and really made that decision purely based on the fact that he knew that CMIT was a place where he could flourish and he could thrive and he could build his career because of the culture and environment that we've built.
Well, yeah, and I remember him specifically saying when I got to the new workplace, it really sucked. I remember him saying that.
Yeah, it's one of those things, right, where, my radar's up whenever I hear anything about culture now, because I know, as they say, right, culture eats strategy for breakfast. Mm-hmm. And what I've found, generally speaking, is that there's a lot of platitudes, right? There's people who say, oh, yes, I agree, culture is so important, and we've got to have culture, and we've got a purpose statement, a vision statement, a mission statement. And if you dig below the surface a little bit, you start to understand that in most, but not all, but most cases, it's kind of window dressing, right? And it's not really integrated into the fabric of the organization from again, I'll go back and use the term human system standpoint, because there is no process really behind it to keep it going from a continual perspective. As I mentioned earlier, it's a marathon, not a sprint, and you've got to be doing a number of different activities consistently in order to point it, in the right direction.
Yeah, it's so great that you keep saying that it's a marathon, not a sprint, because one of the things that happens in a marathon is you have to build resiliency and determination and a strong, commitment. And mentoring is the place where a lot of people, they've gotten through their initial training. Everybody has the common language and the common tools, and then they start dropping the ball when they're moving forward. Like, I haven't worked directly with you much in the last 3 or 4 years, and yet you guys are continuously running that marathon. And mentoring is so critical that I can't emphasize enough how once the basic concepts are learned, that's just the beginning. The mentoring is where people really continue to say, oh gosh, I know all of this, am I going to use it? And so that kind of is a natural lead-in. And I just want to tell you how much you are a role model to so many other businesses, that you really hit the road, where the rubber hits the road by doing the mentoring. So what I wanted to do in this session is make sure that I go over with people, what is the purpose of mentoring in our model, and what are the pitfalls that we help people to stay out of? And then I want to ask you, Mike, to share what you learned when I kind of came in that time recently and oversaw some of your major mentors, and what was it that you kind of learned, and I'll give you my view on that as well. But in the world of LifeWorks systems, mentoring is primarily to help with that emotional intelligence. It's to ask Socratic questions. And recently I was in a client site when I said, say less, ask more. One of the employees went up to the whiteboard and wrote SLAM. So now I've adopted SLAM, say less, ask more. So our model for mentoring, it really falls into that. How do we say less, give less advice, less counseling, and ask more questions? Because when we do that well, a lot of work gets done on the part of the mentee. So one of the purposes is helping them to be not only self-aware and socially aware, but able to manage themselves and those relationships. It's also to review purpose. Like I did with Mike, I asked him, what is the purpose of the company? And he could just pull it up right away, and it wasn't real over long. It was very memorable. We all could picture what he was describing. And it's also making sure that that transfer of responsibility is happening. So those are the major purposes in our mentoring model. It's not to give advice or to talk a lot to the person you're mentoring. It is also to be done every month. And that means that even Mike is mentored every month. And it could even be that Mike mentors an employee, and then that employee could turn around and mentor Mike back. Because that's how equality-based it is, as opposed to I'm bigger, better, smarter, stronger than you, the mentee. It's meant to be, hey, we're all in this together, and let's make sure we're checking in to ask very specific questions. For example, I remember when Jack Canfield would say to his wife every day, are we at a 10? And if they weren't, he would say, what can I do to take it up to a 10? That's a very good example of checking in. Now, we can't expect people to do that every day on everything, but it should be done at least once a month, that there's a dedicated slice of time that's used very efficiently. And if you're doing that right, it means you're probably not falling into these pitfalls that happen during mentoring. So I want to just kind of go over those. And Mike, please just raise your hand or something if you need or want to interject, because these are 8 pitfalls. Do you want to say anything right now while I'm getting ready to go into these?
No, I'm excited to hear them, because I'm sure we've done them all. So I'll be happy to, provide some feedback as we go through.
Okay, so thanks. We all do these pitfalls. It's partly because we always think we have to prove ourselves instead of get out of our own way. But one of the pitfalls is you do not want to allow or even encourage the person that you're mentoring to go into a long story or a conversation, because it's not therapy, venting, or advisement. So a lot of times, Mike, you probably remember me doing this. You might start going into a long tangent, and I'll put the timeout signal, like, timeout, Mike. That's a really great story you might want to tell otherwise, but that's not what we're doing here now, right? And sometimes it's a little awkward when you're the mentor to do that.
Because, what I found is people will show up, right, to mentoring with kind of their own agenda, right? Oh, I had this problem or this issue with this person. I'm going to come in and I'm going to, spill the beans on that situation, right? And so it's not really about that, right? It's about making sure they're using the tools and techniques and other processes that they've learned to be able to manage that situation on their own.
Yeah, in a way, the story can be in the way the story can be a diversion, in the way the story could be a stall. And I don't mean people intentionally do it, but that is actually what's occurring. And the hardest thing for that pitfall is the mentor going, time out. That's not what we're doing right here. Can we go back on track? Which means I'm going to be asking you very specific questions, and you don't need to go into a whole lot of depth about them. They're more like fairly simple. Are you having any relationship that's not a 10? Or what number would you give your productivity? Very simple, quick, responsive, self-awareness, and socially aware questions. One of the things that happens too is the mentor sometimes will fall into the habit of asking, why do you think that's happening? Or who was involved? So why and who questions are really a kind of a waste of time. They sort of go down a path of analysis, which is often followed by paralysis. So when you're mentoring, you want to focus on what and how questions. So if you answer a question to me, if I have a relationship that's not a 10, if I say, why do you think that's happening? Now we're going to analyze. If I say, who's the one causing the problem? Now we're picking and blaming and all of that. But if I said, so Mike, if it's a 7, how will you get it to a 10? Or how will you get it to an 8? Now I'm helping you think in terms of what is the next step I can take. So that pitfall is to fall into why and who questions. Also, sometimes mentees can veer off track. They get on a tangent, it kind of spurs another set of thoughts. Again, the way to handle it is timeout. Another way is people not using the templates. So as you know, we have these very specific templates. And a lot of times people will say, but that feels kind of artificial to me. I don't feel like I'm being myself. And I would say that's kind of a dangerous mindset to have the mentality of I'm going to wing it. What happens when we do that is we often get diverted, or we start using the session for something other than what it's meant to cover, which are all around cultural behaviors within the community of the business, and how do you move yourself forward in your own productivity and motivation and plan. Also, this was a big one with your team, Mike. It was when I would listen to the mentor doing the mentoring, and the other person would say, well, I probably do this, or I probably do that. And I would say, hey, do you notice probably is not self-directed language? Do you remember that, Mike?
I do. Yeah, I do.
And I don't even know if you were one that did it a lot, but I know when I did the oversight with Nick and with Barry, it happened for both of them. And it was just one of those things where I'm really attuned to when people say, well, I'll try, or I know I should. Those are all very vague and uncommitted kind of statements. And I think that was probably one of the biggest pitfalls that I saw in your group the last time. I think that's a tough one, just like not going into stories is.
Yeah, I've noticed that as well. And I pick up on that quickly now. You know, when we talk a lot about accountable requests as well. And that's a topic for another podcast, I'm sure. But it's very often that you get the response, well, I'll try to get that done. You know, and so, you know, it's an interesting response, right? And you have to be intentional about saying, well, you know, try is other directed, as you said, right? That's not a commitment. That's an out. You're giving yourself an out. If you say, I'm going to try to get that done, that means, hey, if I don't get it done, I won't be, you know, responsible any longer. So we got to get that out of our language somehow.
So just out of curiosity, if somebody says, I'll try, and you're mentoring them, what would be the question you would ask them?
I might say something along the lines of, how can we get try changed into I will?
Okay, so now I'm mentoring Mike as we're talking about mentoring. So that's close because you're saying how, you're saying a how question, but you're saying how will we? The real question is, how will you turn your try into I will? Or something along those lines.
Right, transferring that responsibility, right, to the person you're mentoring.
Yeah, so it's such a good example that you're giving, because what we're tempted to do is say, well, do you see you're in other directed and all that? And that's information that they already know. But what will cause them to get to their resolution is to say, I notice you saying try, what's your barrier? Or what will you do to overcome whatever's in your way? Because it's not, you know, you're not committed. What will you do? And that's tough because they don't even know in that moment that they're not committed. So even remember, when we're seeing something in somebody, it's more about saying less, asking more. Another one is the mentor will start interjecting their own agenda. Maybe something that the mentee says makes them feel something that they're very passionate and convicted about, and all of a sudden that becomes a sideline conversation. Another one is that the mentor doesn't manage the 30-minute schedule appropriately. So when you're mentoring someone, you want to be aware of, oh gosh, I have these steps to go through. How will I make sure that I don't get stuck on the first 3 and never get to the last ones? So like, for example, the very first thing we have people do in a mentoring session is express appreciation. So for example, if I were mentoring you, Mike, I might say, Mike, I really appreciate the kind of leader you are and how teachable you are and how much you're willing to commit to your employees. So you see, that took all of a minute, maybe even less than a minute. So sometimes we'll take simple things like sharing purpose, sharing appreciation, and we'll make those so long that we miss out on the rest of the tasks of the mentoring session.
I believe, there was a time in our history from a mentoring standpoint where we really got off track, and we started, to not use a template. It became somewhat unstructured, and it really turned into more like, I guess, counseling or, talking about the issues of the day, kind of an activity. And, with your help, Judy, we got reoriented towards, okay, this is all about the mentee, not the mentor, and really want to be more focused on, as you said, the Socratic method, right? Mm-hmm. That our mentors, by and large, are leaders. So sometimes, staff person will come in and I think view it as an opportunity. They've got, airtime, right? They've got the attention to come in, with their own agenda, as you said, being one of the pitfalls, right? And so, it's all about having a parking lot, right? If they have particular issues or problems that they want to talk about, there's nothing wrong with that. It's just not something that we're going to cover inside of our 30-minute mentoring. So I think that's an important piece of, not only the time out, but, what you have to say is important, but it's just not, part of the scope of this meeting, of this conversation.
Yes, you clearly get that pitfall is important to avoid, because it's so, we're kind-hearted. We are curious about one another, and we do know people want to be heard. So it's not that we don't want to do those things, but we don't want to do them with that set of purposes within that mentoring. So you really clearly see that. One thing that it reminds me of is when we were doing that presentation with your 3 team members, and Orion said his biggest concern in working in your culture model at first was, oh, they're probably giving us a bunch of BS like all corporations do, saying how much they want to hear what we have to say and all that. And then he said, I remember when I got into my first mentoring sessions, I realized this was for real, because they were asking questions and they did want to hear what I have to say. Do you remember him saying that?
I do. Yeah.
Yeah. That was such a great, because a lot of companies do say they want to hear, but then they don't make a space for hearing.
Right. So I may have a 9th pitfall, Judy.
Okay.
One of the other problems that we found, and we're in, like many businesses today, right? Fast-paced, dynamic, lots of things to do, always something more urgent, more pressing. And there's a natural tendency to say, oh, well, we've got mentoring scheduled today for 30 minutes, but we really don't have time for that. Mm-hmm. Let's reschedule that for next week, or let's skip this month, et cetera. That's a pitfall that I know that we've fallen into from time to time. And I view it as a discipline that you have to make sure that you are conducting the mentoring on a monthly basis. And the way to get over that hump, I think, is to look at it from an investment standpoint. You will get a return on that investment in increased employee engagement, productivity, better relationships, which will more than make up for the half hour of time that you spend together with a mentee once a month.
Right, exactly. And sometimes our tendency to push it off as, well, that's something we can take out of the agenda for the month because we're busy, right? Sometimes that is because we are going deeper, further with people, and it's a little frightening to them. I remember, Mike, I hope this doesn't make you feel bad, but I remember one time going to one of your group review sessions where there were about half of the group had not done their group review. And afterwards I said, you got an issue to go and talk about with your team, because about half of them have dropped their commitment to doing their work. And you said, but they're so busy. And I remember saying to you, Mike, you have 4 kids, you're a soccer coach, you're an owner, you go to a bunch of extra meetings. Did you make time for these sessions? And you said, well, yeah. And I said, then why would you hold them to less of a standard? So part of it is, even when we're doing a good job, we're afraid that people will get offended at us if we expect more from them, right?
Yep.
So that could be like, it's always good to look at, why would we skip this? If there was a barrier that we were unconscious of, why would we skip this? Oh, it might be because these get really uncomfortable when we get really real.
I think that's a big part of it.
Yeah.
I really do. And sometimes I've found that people might not necessarily want to be personally responsible.
Oh, yeah.
They may prefer to live in a world where they aren't accountable, right, for the things that they have to do on a day in and day out basis.
Yeah, I remember when you guys went through one of your recent surveys and there were a couple of behaviors for trust that were a little out of whack. And you all went around to each other and said, am I failing on any of these behaviors? And you had a few people say you had a 9 instead of a 10. And you said, ooh, that was hard for me to hear, even though it wasn't like you were failing miserably. And that's how we all feel. We feel a little bit like we're expecting to be punished when we're asked questions. And what's beautiful about your organization is you've created it so that people can trust each other more. Because I read recently that until you have consistent psychological safety for at least 6 months, people won't believe you, that you're not going to punish them or hurt them or anything, even if you have to say tough things. So I do want to take a quick pause, because I know that we're a good way through this podcast. And I just want to take a minute to remind our listeners to look a little bit deeper into Lifeworks Systems. Lifeworks Systems specializes in performance management through healthy culture transformation. And Mike's a great example of that. So we ask you to go to our website to learn more about Lifeworks Systems and how to get involved with us, including accessing information related to today's podcast, but also the past podcasts. And when you go on our website, you can subscribe to our podcast, and you can also join our mailing list if you want. There's plenty of things to do on our website. And also, we would love for you to know how to contact us. So on our website, you'll find our phone and our email. So I just wanted to sneak that in there. Mike, I also wanted to mention something to you that I don't know if CMIT is doing this, but you guys might want to try the reverse mentoring if you're not. Because imagine how it feels to an employee who says, they're done mentoring, and you say, now would you do my 30-minute mentoring? Because it's a breakdown of an artificial barrier sometimes that we can't both be that reciprocal. Do you guys ever do that?
Very rarely, but I think it's a great idea, and I would like to see more of it.
Yeah, it kind of feeds into that feeling of them feeling that they can make contributions to you, which is one of the core needs. I know I would have loved that. I think that's why I do this work. I would have loved if my parents had come to me and said, could you give me your opinion on this? Because that was never happening when we were growing up. It was always, let me tell you how you should think. And they were good people, don't get me wrong, but they didn't have any curiosity. And I would have felt so honored if they'd said, what do you think? So it's just something to consider. We don't always push it, but it is something that is often needed. So Mike, you know this, but our audience doesn't know this, that our mentoring templates start in the very first month of working with a client. And it's really in the beginning to help them ground some of the real basic concepts, like what is a personal responsibility model versus a control model? What does it mean to be trustworthy? What does it mean to be personally responsible? Those kinds of questions are in the early templates. But some of those questions are also questions that get people over the discomfort of discomfort, right? Do you remember one time you asked one of your employees, if there was anything that would cause you to leave, what would it be? And this employee said, well, I wish you paid me more money. Right? And that was a tough one. And I even said to you, Mike, you don't have to fix that right away. You just want to notice that, look how much courage it took for you to ask the question and him to answer that question. And if I remember right, you guys came up with a creative resolution to that when somebody ended up leaving.
We did. Yeah, I do remember that. And as you're saying it, it sounds like maybe to the average listener that that's an unwanted result, right, of going through that process. But what I've found is it's much better to get that out on the table early, because then as a business person, you have an opportunity to address it, right? As opposed to trying to mind read and guess. That's been one of the most wonderful things about mentoring and LifeWorks is we don't have to guess as much as we used to from a business standpoint. We know where people stand because they're comfortable and they trust us to approach us and share and know that they're not going to be retaliated against because we've created this culture where they're comfortable doing that. So
and you're comfortable enough. And I know the listeners can tell how much courage you have just from that one example, Mike, because you're absolutely right. Most people might think, well, that's an insane question. What would have you leave us? But it's actually, like you said, having it above board. I remember one time in a mentoring session, a manager asked her employee, are you at a 10 with everybody on our team? And she said, yes. And then the manager asked this question, which was on the template, are you and I at a 10? And the other person looked away, and the manager said, I promise you there will be no retaliation. I can see there's something going on. Please tell me what it is. And the employee was a brand new employee. She'd only been there about 45 days. And her response was, well, honestly, I figure you're going to fire me any minute now. And the manager was like, what? And she said, when you hired me, you told me my first 30 days was a trial period and that I would find out on my 30th day whether I was accepted or not. And 30 days came and went and I never heard anything. So I assume you're finding my replacement. Now you can see how important that was information to know about, right?
Absolutely.
And that manager was able to say, oh my gosh, I am so sorry. You didn't deserve that. It was a terrible, misstep on my part. We love you. We want you here. But imagine that 15 days where that conversation didn't occur. That person might have been on like all those job boards and, thinking about who can I tell that I'm going to need a new job soon. And they're probably not very present.
Yeah, not at all. And, we have those same challenges, right? I think every organization does about setting and meeting expectations when it comes to employees. And it's always somewhat imperfect science, right? And so got to have these touch points and these avenues where people can be heard, right? And feel comfortable being heard and expressing when their expectations aren't met and when they have concerns and they have issues, because it's just the reality of the situation that we live in. I used to think as a business owner, we'll have a perfect system where there'll never be any missed expectations. And then you start to realize that's utopia, right? That place does not exist. So it has helped us as well in being able to, get out in front of those issues before they turn into real problems.
Well, and that's the thing. I think also people are terrified of questions, meaning they're going to automatically get in trouble, whether it's the owner asking a question or an employee asking a question or being asked a question. And the more that you're asking these questions that are clearly to support the employee, the more that they trust the questions that you send to them, because they're not designed to catch you and get you and punish you. And that's what so many of us were raised with, even in our childhoods, in our schools, and then in our first workplaces. We had a guy at one of our client sites that came to a mentoring session, and I happened to be sitting in on a couple of them that he was in. And each time he would start to tear up. Now, he didn't sob or anything, but he would tear up and he'd say, it's so hard for me to trust all of this because my experience in my past company was so terrible that if I ever revealed anything, it was always used against me. So it was just going to take time for him to realize he was going to be okay in this environment.
Yeah, I can see where that people coming in from a different culture, from a different time period, from an autocratic style leadership, it's a challenge. I mean, I went through that personally, right? I mean, that was my background, and having to go through a change for myself individually was not overnight. And it's interesting as we continue, obviously, to grow the business and hire new people. When somebody comes in from that kind of an environment, it requires a fair amount of time and training and mentoring to get them adjusted to the culture where it's okay to share ideas and opinions and not feel like, you've got to put on your game face at work.
Right, that your same face can be at anywhere, and that you don't have to be perfect. You can make mistakes, right? Because if you can't get to that point where, gosh, we're even comfortable about what we didn't think would happen, or we're afraid to say, it brings a huge amount of energy that's often held up in stress in the body into where it can be used for creativity. By the time a company is at month 5, so you guys are well beyond that, except for maybe with your new employees, what you're doing with the template is you're going through a pretty consistent process, right? So it's the first thing that I mentioned earlier was with Mike, I gave him recognition and appreciation. And then I would review his purpose and values, which we did. And then I would say to you, Mike, mine is to create a world where people love their lives. So I'm grateful that you help me love my life and you help the people in your company love their lives by investing time and energy into them. And so you see how even just talking about the purpose reminds us what we're going for. And that doesn't have to have a ton of attention on it, just some attention. Are you loving your life, Mike?
I am loving my life. Absolutely.
Good. Because I remember one time a couple of years ago, I said to my mentor, because I have a coach, because I can't always see my blind spots. In fact, when I see something, I'm like, how could I not see that? I teach this, right? But I wasn't loving my life in that I was prospecting. I didn't like prospecting. And she said, well, why don't you fire yourself from that job? So I did. And I honestly felt like a kid let out of jail. So sometimes even talking about purpose can lead you to self-awareness, self-management. And what's developed instead has been beautiful, which is working through other partnerships and so on, and not having to do that role. I'm happy you're loving your life. Also, just to kind of finish this up, what I would normally do with somebody like Mike, if I were mentoring him regularly, is I would just go through and do a quick report card on, Mike, are there any relationships that are not a 10? Are there, just out of curiosity?
I would say there are a couple.
Okay. Do you know, so there's 2, is that right?
2.
Okay. What numbers would you give them?
I would give one an 8 and the other a 9.
Okay. So not in terrible crisis, right?
No.
Okay. And then I would say to Mike, in terms of your own productivity in your life right now, especially with all these changes with the coronavirus and being stuck at home and everything, would you give yourself a 10 in terms of being productive at this time?
I would not. I would give myself 9 on productivity.
Okay, so there's a few barriers there, a few things that you would want to maybe work on. What about your own engagement in your work right now and in your life? Do you feel like you're excited to get up in the morning and face your life, or do you feel like you dread it? Anything on that?
I'm at a 10 on engagement.
Okay. And so what I would do with Mike is he's got 2 areas where he's not at a 10, and I would probably encourage him, which one of these is most important to you to work on?
I would say relationships.
Okay. Did you know before I asked the question that you had 2 that were not at a 10? Was it real crystal clear that
I had to think about it for a moment.
Yeah.
I had to think about it for a moment, but yeah, I mean, there are 2 relationships that I need to work on.
Yeah. Now, Mike knows this process. Those of you listening kind of just have to take our word for it. But I would have Mike go through on the template these 8 behaviors that build trust. And I would be saying to him, in the relationship where you have an 8 or a 9, let's just take one in your head. And I would say, Mike, which of these behaviors are you falling down on with them? And then I would say, in which behaviors is this other person who's in that with you, what are they falling down on? And it doesn't mean that we're going to do that right now, Mike, but that is the process, right?
Yep. That's what we do every month.
Yeah. And then you might find 3 things that you're doing poorly and 2 or 3 things they're doing poorly. And then the issue is, again, like you said, it's a marathon, not a sprint. So I might say, okay, for the sake of this mentoring, what's one thing you would want to improve? And how will you go about it? And then at least it gives him a chance that maybe this 8 can become a 9 relatively quickly. So anything you want to say about that process, Mike?
I think it's a great process. What I found is you can kind of get a sense in each of your mentoring sessions if the mentee is coming in with a real intent to work on their relationships or their productivity or their engagement, many times I get a 10, and maybe this is a question for you, Judy. Let's say I sense that someone, today is just kind of mailing it in, right? They're not really there to do the hard work, because working on relationships is hard work.
Mm-hmm.
And there are times when I have someone tell me that all the relationships are a 10.
Mm-hmm. And
depending on the size of the organization and people that you're interacting with, it's not easy to have all your relationships at a 10.
Mm-hmm.
So many times I will pause there and not just check a box, right, and roll through it, but challenge them a little bit, not to invent things, but are you sure that all relationships are at a 10? What's the best way to handle those situations?
Well, I think what you're saying even bigger than that is sometimes people show up at a mentoring session not truly committed to wanting to move anything forward. They're either stuck in the status quo, or they're even afraid to look, like even to gain the awareness of themselves or the relationship dynamics that they're managing. But if you feel that you want them to want more than they're doing, there's a mistaken goal there that you and I know called the goal of inadequacy, right? So we can typically feel when somebody's in that place of I'm performing here when I could be performing here, which I'm putting one hand below the other. So for those of you listening, but so when you are suspicious that somebody's holding back their ability to grow, that's where you want to use the redirect and say, Mike, it feels like you're not showing up to this mentoring, really wanting to move anything forward or make any improvements. Do you remember how in the goal of inadequacy, you make a statement and then you ask a question? So however you want to do this, Mike, pick one area on this mentoring template that you want to make an active improvement on. Would you be willing to do that and tell me what that is? So that's still a Socratic question, but it puts it on them that, hey, I'm expecting you to pick up a little more responsibility during this mentoring session.
Yeah, I like that. That's good. I'm going to write that down.
Yeah, either that or go back and look at the goal of inadequacy.
Right.
That's always so tempting to let people off the hook, and just say, well, they're probably having a bad day. But it can become one of these things where we keep making exemptions.
Yeah.
So,
well, on the reverse side, I remember one time you taught me, because sometimes I will get this as an answer. Say we're talking about productivity, and someone might say, I'm at a 9 on productivity because we can never be perfect. I'll never give you a 10, whether it's productivity or engagement or relationships. I'll never be at a 10 because I know there's always room for improvement. What you taught me was that's okay, if they want to make that statement, but what they need to do is they need some examples, right? Of why it's at a 9 and not at a 10. Say, for example, with productivity, what is an example of something that's keeping you from being at a 10 when it comes to productivity? Yeah, that challenges them, right? Not to just give a blanket statement every time, but to really think about.
Yeah, and if they have no answer to that question, you would be able to say to them, so at this time, your productivity couldn't be better, because you can't even think of an example that it could be better, and that's all we mean by a 10. It doesn't mean you're in some kind of static place of perfection all the time, but it means in this moment, I don't have any problems that I'm aware of that I need to work on. So I'm glad you brought that up, because you're right. People are uncomfortable saying it's really okay right now. And yet you've probably had this experience, Mike, and we can kind of wrap up on this, of when people get mentored long enough, they often get to the point where they can go through and say, I really don't have any relationships right now that are troublesome. I'm really feeling pretty productive and I really feel good about my engagement. And now all you work on with them is either their blueprint or saying, hey, why don't we practice the redirect tool, or why don't we practice this tool since we got 20 minutes? And that's when your people are really co-creating something new with you, because they're managing the day-to-day pretty regularly. Have you had that experience?
Yeah, with certain individuals, and what you find is that there's a spectrum of people, right? And some will take to this much more readily and quickly than others do. But for those people who are 100% bought in, committed, and thinking about this on an ongoing basis, very much so, you get to a place where you can quickly move through the template and get to a place where you are working on tools, techniques, their own personal blueprint, and those are great sessions. They're all great sessions, but those are nice ones, right? Where you can kind of get into more of the meat around some of these tools, techniques, and the blueprint.
Yeah, and I think that also I remember one time at the presentation, Lydia said, it's sort of a contagion with us. The more we get what we're doing, the more we're all doing it, it somewhat rubs off. I would think you're seeing that after all these years.
Yeah, you go through this process of going through the steps and the techniques and the tools and the checklists and the templates. And at first, it feels a little bit like it's unnatural and maybe a little bit forced. But what you find with anything, with practice and repetition, eventually it becomes just part of what you do on a day in and day out basis. And it becomes more natural.
It does. And honest to goodness, it is unnatural at first. Because how many times do people, like Orion saying, I just thought this was going to be another BS promise that every company makes. So it is unnatural because we haven't been asked a lot and given opportunities to think through and make new decisions. So it does become, like you said, though, it becomes a way of life. And so I appreciate that I had you on here, Mike, with so much real life experience. And even you are continuously growing. You're willing to look at, oh gosh, I wonder if we could do this reverse mentoring, because maybe that would be a next step for us. Or I wonder now if I want to go back and fix that 2 relationships that are at 8 and a 9, So I appreciate the fact that this was a very rich conversation. And I want to go ahead and wrap up this session, but I want to make a couple quick statements. One was that I had a couple of other quotes that I just want to leave our listening audience with, and you as well, Mike. And this one is by Plato. And he said, don't train a child to learn by force or harshness, but direct them to it by what amuses their minds, so that they may be better able to discover with accuracy the peculiar bent of the genius of each. So, in this model, Mike, that the belief we hold about people is that they are and want to be great. And I love how this is saying you help them discover with accuracy the particular bent of the genius of each. It's even saying we're not only great, we're genius about our own lives. And that's really what you're doing in good, healthy mentoring. And then this one by Plutarch, the mind is not a vessel to be filled, but a fire to be kindled. So just kind of keep those in mind as you continue to promote mentoring in your community and be a resource to the people, because they're going home and they're probably better mentors to their children, their partners, their friends and neighbors. And, they're helping to kindle those knowledge nuggets within people. So I really appreciate that about you. I want to also just end with thank you for everyone, for you, Mike, for our listening audience. Thank you for listening to LifeWorks today.
Thank you for listening to LifeWorks today. This podcast has been brought to you by LifeWorks Systems CEO and host Judy Ryan. The intent of this podcast is to provide you with hope and new ideas for greater joy in your life and work. For more information on our organization and earlier podcast episodes, related articles, videos, and more, please visit our website at lifeworksystems.com. Be sure to subscribe to our podcast and mailing list. We invite you to join us in creating a world in which all people love their lives and where your life works today.